It's not even pink, it's raw!
And Coop has delivered undercooked salmon.
Gordon Ramsay is probably the most famous chef in history. He's hosted some of the greatest cooking shows of all time, ran multiple Michelin star restaurants, and his explosive temper has been a running joke for decades.
You're cooking in a burnt pan, you f***ing dick! Look at me, hey, look, you ignorant f***. Look at my f***ing eyes when I'm talking to you. Surprise is the f***ing bass is f***ing raw!
Now, this video is not about Gordon Ramsay. It's about his former boss.
My reputation is a product of exaggeration and ignorance. Did I shout? Yes. Did I scream? At times.
He remains the only human being, as far as I'm aware, who's ever made Gordon Ramsay cry.
No, I didn't make Gordon Ramsay cry. He made himself cry. That was his choice to cry.
This is Marco Pierre White, former Michelin star chef, television personality, and Gordon Ramsay's mentor. In many ways, Marco walked so Ramsay could run. He wasn't the first celebrity chef, but he was the first cool celebrity chef, to the point where he essentially redefined the image of cooks in popular culture. But despite starring in an impressive portfolio of cooking shows on his own, he's always played second fiddle to Ramsay in the media circuit. So why hasn't Marco had the same worldwide success as his disciple? Well, for one, he's absolutely terrifying.
Do you sometimes miss the simplicity of just being behind a stove?
Trust me when I say this. There's nothing simple being behind a stove.
See, if Ramsay gets mad, he'll yell at you and call you an idiot sandwich or whatever. But if Marco gets mad, it's a whole different beast.
Have some fucking respect. Do not push me. I don't think you understand what I am. I control myself very well.
Yeah, there's a reason why Masterchef Jr. chose Ramsay over this guy. This is not to imply that Marco is in any way unsuccessful. He is an extremely accomplished chef, and even if he's not as much of an international household name like Ramsay, he's still one of the biggest and most celebrated chefs in the industry. But comparing the two is interesting, because despite Ramsay being the better known out of the two, Marco is, in some ways, more Ramsay than Ramsay himself. He is scarier, he's more volatile, and in some ways even more accomplished.
Marco was, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the youngest chef to get 3 Michelin stars, the first British-born chef to get 3 fucking Michelin stars.
Because of that, Marco has accrued a significant cult following in the last few years. Like, I've seen him built up as this mythical super chef, like he's the secret final boss you face after defeating Gordon Ramsay. But is that reputation truly deserved? Yes, and I'll get into why. But first, we need to start at the beginning. Marco Pierre White was practically born to be a chef. His name is even a metaphor for the holy trinity of classical cuisine, being part Italian, part French, and part British. Though despite the exotic combination of names, Marco's upbringing was predominantly English, growing up in a Leeds council house in the 1960s. There he lived with his English father, his Italian mother, and his 2 older brothers. Marco was especially attached to his mother, and some of the fondest memories he recalls from his childhood were spending time with her and her family in Italy. In the later years, Marco would always credit his mother's cooking for introducing him to the world of gastronomy.
My earliest memory of risotto was when I was a young boy of maybe 4 or 5 years old. I was sitting on the side watching my mother make it. And I suppose that was my first gastronomic lesson, really.
Life was more or less normal for Marco, until one day, tragedy struck the White household.
I mean, the most defining moment of my life was the day my mother died. And like I'm sitting with you now, I watched my mother die.
This obviously shaped Marco immensely. No matter where he is in his life, the loss of his mother permeates everything he does.
It's like being that boy of 6 again. And you know what's amazing? It's almost the same decor. There's only one difference. My mum's not here. But in spirit, she is.
Nevertheless, life had to go on. Marco did not do well in school, struggling against the draconian school system that infected post-war Britain. And after years of falling grades, his father decided to pull his son out of school altogether.
I never wanted to be a chef. I never thought I was going to leave school. It didn't even enter my brain. But then one day I was told that I'm leaving school and I've got to go and find a job. My father was a chef, my uncle was a chef, my grandfather was a chef, my brothers were chefs. And in those days, being working class, you tended to follow your father's footsteps.
He ended up finding work as a chef's apprentice at Hotel St. George in Harrogate. And it's working here that Marco stumbles upon a book that would change his life forever.
On the chair where I sat was a small book. And on the front of it, it said the Eager and Ronnie Guide to Hotels and Restaurants in Great Britain. I started flicking through it. And what I realized was that restaurants had stars.
And just like that, Marco has found his purpose. He goes from just training to be a chef to training to become the greatest chef in England. So he finds the restaurant with the most Michelin stars in Britain, the Box Tree, with 2 stars to their name.
And then one day, I approached Box Tree for a job. And on the day that I approached Box Tree for a job, a young man had given his notice in the kitchen. So I got my interview, and I got my job at Box Tree.
Box Tree was a huge step up from the St. George Hotel, both in terms of prestige and the level of talent that Marco was exposed to, and it allowed him to develop his skills at a rapid pace. Eventually, though, Marco's ambitions grew bolder. Back in the day, Michelin was considerably more conservative in what restaurants they considered worthy for their guide. So if Marco wanted to achieve his dream of 3 Michelin stars, he needed to pursue classical French cuisine. So Marco eventually left the Box Tree and took a job as an apprentice at Le Gavroche, another Michelin-starred restaurant.
And I find myself looking through the windows of this very elegant restaurant. I think, wow, this is beautiful. And I look at the name above the door. Above the door, it says Le Gavroche.
Eventually, Marco would build an impeccable resume, not only working for Box Tree and Le Gavroche, but also other prestigious restaurants like Le Toncle and Chesnico. And what did they all have in common? Well, despite being some of the greatest restaurants in Britain at the time, they all sucked ass to work at. High-end restaurants are awful, man, especially back then. Think about it, you're working 16-hour shifts in a cramped room with no natural light and no air conditioning. You're fighting for space with 9 other sweaty dudes. You have to balance making perfect dish after perfect dish while somehow being as fast as humanly possible. Despite being exposed to delicious food all day, all you've eaten the last 11 hours is a Red Bull and a pack of cigarettes. You're constantly dehydrated, your arms and hands are covered in burns, and you do this for 16 hours straight with no breaks before finally collapsing in your bed at 1 a.m. before waking up at 6 a.m. to do it all again. And the pay is shit. Unsurprisingly, the rates of mental health issues in chefs are astounding, with some studies indicating that at least half of American chefs suffer from symptoms of depression, with many more struggling with alcoholism and cocaine abuse. The classical French kitchens that Marco worked at could be especially cruel. These closely followed the kitchen brigade system, outlined by French Masterchef Auguste Escoffier. The brigade system ensures that each cook has a dedicated role in the kitchen. For example, instead of having 3 chefs constantly alternating between preparing meat, vegetables, fish, etc., you have 1 dedicated meat cook, 1 dedicated vegetable cook, and 1 dedicated fish cook. The brigade system also introduces a strict military-based hierarchy, and with a military-based hierarchy comes military-inspired discipline. If a chef makes a mistake or does not deliver to the proper standard, it's the job of the chefs above them in the hierarchy to discipline them.
Because this is a f***ing laughing stock. This is a dream. This is a piss take. Get with it, dickhead.
Usually this discipline is dished out verbally, though depending on the nature of the mistake or how bad a mood the superior chef is in, this discipline is often dished out physically as well. Marco calls this harsh form of discipline bollocking, and it's a significant part of kitchen culture to this day. But why is that? Well, the main justification that these chefs use is that working in a kitchen is simply excruciating, and surviving in that environment requires a chef to be exceptionally tough. So the same way that grueling military discipline creates tough soldiers, grueling discipline in the kitchen creates tough chefs, capable of delivering food consistently and to the proper standard. Unfortunately, for many kitchens, the line between discipline and abuse doesn't really exist. For younger cooks especially, this kind of treatment is just something they're expected to endure, to prove that they are actually chef material. So Marco did.
He said, whatever the chef says to you, whatever he screams at you, whether he swears at you, abuses you, you just say, yes, chef. And that's what I did. I just said, yes, chef.
Marco himself credits the bollocking he received during his training as crucial to giving him the discipline he needed to succeed in the kitchen. However, being a good chef isn't all about ruthlessly following orders. In 1985, Marco started working at the restaurant La Menoir à Quai-de-Saison under chef Raymond Blanc.
As you know, before, you had always this gift to throw things on the plate and they would always look marvelous, okay? That's one gift. That's a cosmetic of food. But what was your slight problem was the taste. And I think by the meal I had today, I must say it was absolutely stunning in every way.
Raymond Blanc was rather mild by chef standards. He would still yell and curse at his chefs from time to time, but the overall kitchen environment was a lot less hostile than Marco was used to. This meant that he was able to foster his creative side more, rather than just surviving the kitchen environment through brute force. Raymond Blanc was so enthusiastic and encouraging that I discovered a sense of freedom. And that is where my confidence started to grow. It seemed as if I had done painting by numbers, and now I was being given a blank, or perhaps blanc, canvas. So in 1987, when Marco was hired as head chef for the newly reopened restaurant Harvey's, he decided that he wasn't going to replicate the tyrannical environment that elite kitchens were typically known for. Instead, he was going to be much worse. Harvey's was not an immediate success. In fact, the first few months were pretty rough. But thankfully, the restaurant was rescued by a surprise visitor.
So now 1 month goes by, 2 months goes by, and we're doing no covers, minimal. Then what happens is, I told you when I was a young boy of 16 at the Hotel St. George, I found a little guide saying the Egan Ronay Guide to Hotels and Restaurants in Great Britain. 2.5 months later, Egan Ronay, the most powerful food critic in Britain, and most respected, walks through my doors.
Once Egan's review hit the Sunday Times, it was like a starting gun had gone off, and Harvey's became an overnight success.
Who is calling? I'm sorry, Marco is in Paris today. He will not be back until Tuesday the 30th.
But while Harvey's was commended for its food, the press found themselves drawn to Marco himself, and he quickly gained the reputation as one of the most volatile chefs in Britain.
Doesn't anyone want to help me? No? You've all got better things to do? Well,
one of the things that Marco became known for was just how shit he treated his staff. As one of his former understudies, Mario Batali, put it, Marco was the very first to become famous for treating his team with a humiliating lack of respect.
I expect results, and if somebody makes a mistake in my establishment, then I do shout at them. Because at the end of the day, it's my name above the door, and if the customer writes a letter of complaint, then it's to me and not to the young person concerned.
Marco would yell at his team, loudly and often. Sometimes, if he was really mad, he might even chuck a pan or a pot their way. This is, unfortunately, not that unusual for a kitchen. But Marco also had his own brand of unusual punishments that he dished out on his team. According to his autobiography, The Devil in the Kitchen, one of his go-to techniques was throttling, or choking for you Americans. Essentially, if you weren't working fast enough, Marco would come up from behind and choke you for 10 seconds or so to get your focus back up. Another classic was a maneuver he dubbed binning. If one of his chefs were going particularly slow, Marco could order the rest of the crew to bin them, which meant literally picking up said chef and chucking them into the kitchen garbage. Other punishments were more spontaneous and unpredictable. Marco would recall one time a chef was about to send out a soup that wasn't hot enough, to which Marco responded by pouring the soup down the chef's apron. Another incident happened as a result of Marco refusing to air condition his kitchen.
Because if a kitchen's too cold, the food goes cold. That's why you don't want air conditioning in your kitchen. You want the kitchen to be hot, the main kitchen, so the food goes out hot.
One day, one of the chefs complained about the heat, to which Marco responded by taking his paring knife and expertly slashing up the chef's uniform and forcing him to wear it until the end of the service. Now, some of you might be questioning if treating your staff like this is absolutely necessary. Marco, of course, would say that it is, writing, "If you're not extreme, then people will take shortcuts because they don't fear you. And to achieve and retain the very highest standards day after day, meal after meal in an environment as difficult and fast and chaotic as a restaurant kitchen is extreme." Marco's wrath did not end at just his crew, but also extended to his patrons as well, as he quickly gained a reputation for kicking out diners with impunity.
Someone told me that you kicked out 8 people in the last 2 weeks. What were the reasons for that?
I think that's right. 8 people in 2 weeks. God, I'm below par.
Marco had even perfected kicking out dinner guests to a science. If Marco decided you weren't eating there anymore, a coordinated team of waiters would swoop in and clear your entire table in 15 seconds flat. In later years, Marco insists that he only kicked out customers who were rude towards him or his staff, though his standards for rudeness were by no means static.
The thing about Marco is, he's 2 different guys. If you've got the serious Marco, you've got a problem. If you've got the other Marco, then you can have a good time with him.
Though the prospect of being randomly kicked out might seem like it drove diners away, it was by no means a deterrent. Instead, people found it kind of exciting, and the press especially ate it up. This escalated after the release of the book White Heat in 1990. White Heat is a hard book to categorize, being essentially part cookbook and part manifesto. The recipes themselves were admittedly a bit rushed and difficult to execute, but what really mattered was everything else. Now, it's hard to imagine now, but back when White Heat came out, the face of chefs in pop culture looked like this. You know, the classic chef look.
Chef excellence.
But White Heat changed all that. It was littered with excellent black and white photos of a young, handsome Marco looking cool as shit, accompanied by scattered quotes about his cooking philosophy.
And around my kitchen, we took a look at that picture and said, oh my God, he looks like us. Oh, he's not some fat Frenchman.
It's a period in time of that rock and roll period in gastronomy. It was people like yourself, it was people like me, one or two others who made cooking sexy, because it wasn't sexy.
No, it was a profession for misfits and losers.
God, I was a great misfit.
White Heat cemented Marco as a modern culinary icon and subsequently propelled Harvey's into being one of the most hip kitchens around. It was also one of the toughest restaurant gigs in Britain. 16-hour shifts? Oh yeah. Cramped working conditions? You betcha. Lunch breaks? What are you, stupid? Yeah, initially Marco didn't give his team any lunch breaks. Throughout the day, the cooks subsisted on a diet of cheap mineral water, caffeine, and Twix, with the exception of Marco, who is not documented to have eaten anything at all.
I never saw Marco sit down and eat. Never.
Sometimes, if the diners did not finish their food, the waiters would sneak off and eat the scraps themselves before returning the plates to the kitchen. It wasn't unheard of for chefs to collapse mid-service, and the person who worked the hardest of all was Marco himself. Now, the problem with working yourself to death is that eventually you might actually die, and Marco had some pretty close calls as the years progressed. Last summer, at the age of 28, half a year after he swept to his second Michelin star, Marco Pierre White collapsed. His blood pressure was a staggering 210 over 180. The normal level for a young adult is 120 over 80. On return from the hospital, he closed the restaurant 2 days a week. That helped, but he still suffers from panic attacks and hyperventilation in the middle of the night. Again, the haunting message: his craft will kill him. This excruciating dedication ensured that Marco saw results with Harvey's immediately, earning his first Michelin star within a year, followed by a second star shortly after. As you might expect, the staff at Harvey's had an absolutely insane turnover rate, with very few chefs being able to survive working under Marco for more than a week. However, one of the few who did was a 19-year-old aspiring chef called Gordon Ramsay.
That's why he's gone so far within the profession, because without any classical training, he's got this great understanding for food.
Gordon did quite well at Harvey's, and he endured longer than most. Just like Marco in his early career, Ramsay was bollocked relentlessly, but he always took it like a champ, until one day, he cracks.
But Chef, you were famous for bringing people to tears.
Gordon Ramsay made himself cry. It was his choice.
According to Gordon, one day Marco was out for lunch with a fellow chef, leaving the rest of the chefs to do lunch service without him. When lunch was over, Marco was supposed to come back to the kitchen to prepare sauces for dinner. Gordon got the idea that if he prepared the sauces himself, he and the rest of the team could take a quick 10-minute break before Marco came back.
So I decided to do the sauces myself. I was so proud of them. The Morel sauce, the red wine hermitage sauce, the Madeira sauce, the fish velouté.
When Marco discovered that Gordon had made the sauces for him, he flipped his shit. The cooks, who were unfortunate enough to be in the kitchen at the time, found themselves directly in the firing lines, quickly scrambling into whatever hiding places they could find as Marco flung pots and pans with wild abandon. When he ran out of pots to throw, he reached for the sauces themselves, flinging them all across the kitchen floor. The next thing I knew, Gordon was sobbing in the corner, holding his head in his hands, with tears rolling down his cheeks. He was saying things like, "I don't care what you do to me. Hit me. I don't care." Gordon talks further about working under Marco in his autobiography, Humble Pie. According to Gordon,
we were all young and insecure, and Marco played on that. He'd find out about your home life while you stood there peeling your asparagus or your baby potatoes. Then 4-5 hours later, when you were in the middle of service and you screwed up, he would say, "I fucking told you were a shit cook. You can't fucking roast a pigeon because you're too busy worrying about your mum and dad's divorce."
Now, this next part was actually cut from the audiobook, so I'm gonna have to read it to you myself. Another classic occasion was when Stefan Terry, another of the chefs, attended his grandfather's funeral and made the mistake of going to the wake afterwards. When he got back a bit late, Marco said, "I told you that you could go to the fucking funeral, but that you couldn't go for tea and biscuits. I want you back in the fucking kitchen." We were making tagliatelle that day, and Marco was shouting, "Come on, Steve, fucking turn it, you c-." So he said, "Yes, Marco, I'm fucking on my way." That was it. Crash. Marco slapped him in the face. "That's it," he said. "Get out of here. You may as well f*** off underground and join your granddad." It's hard to read this and not think that Marco is a complete psychopath. But allow me to run defense for him here, just a little bit. Harvey's, and subsequently Marco, would go on to produce many great chefs, many of which have credited their time at Harvey's as essential to developing their skills, including Ramsay himself. For many of the chefs working there, Harvey's would be the hardest kitchen they ever set foot in, and they could walk into basically any kitchen after it with the confidence that they'd be able to handle it. That being said though, sane, well-adjusted people don't go around slapping their employees for going to their grandfather's wake. That is sociopathic behavior. But the cruelty of his methods didn't matter to Marco, as long as the food that came out of it was good.
At the end of the day, we've got to get results, and I don't care how we get them. I don't care how many boys we've got to go through to get them.
And lucky for Marco, the food coming out of the kitchen was really, really good. And Harvey's would go on to become one of the highest regarded restaurants in Britain. However, there was one problem which Marco could no longer ignore. Harvey's was tiny. To earn his coveted 3 Michelin stars, he needed to expand. So in 1993, he left Harvey's and opened the restaurant Marco Pierre White at the Hyde Park Hotel. The extra space allowed him to double his staff capacity and expand his menu. And so, with everything set in place for a 3-star victory, there wasn't really anything left to do, other than to grind at it.
To people who want to hear me, when they ask me about you, I said, I hope he can last. Because my only concern, you are traveling at 1,000 miles an hour. And you can only do that for a certain time.
And after pushing himself and his crew for years, it finally paid off.
And in 1995, January, we won our 3 stars in Michelin. Me and the team.
Marco Pierre White became the youngest person in history to receive 3 Michelin stars, as well as the first British chef to achieve 3 stars. So that's it, right? Marco did it. No. Michelin has one more metric for determining a restaurant's quality: the couvert system, otherwise referred to as knives and forks.
But my dream, because of one restaurant, which the bosses used to speak of constantly, was called La Serre. And La Serre had 3 stars in Michelin and 5 red knives and forks. In 1995, when I won my 3 stars, I had 4 black knives and forks.
These were not awarded based on the quality of the food, but rather on the comfort, decor, and service of the restaurant. To get that coveted 5 red knives and forks, Marco needed to make some changes. He decided to swap for an even more luxurious venue, going from his location at the Hyde Hotel to the Oak Room at the Meridian Hotel. He expanded the wine list considerably. Where other restaurants might have had 6 or 7 different vintages to choose from, Marco had closer to 100. Towards the end of the restaurant's lifespan, his wine cellar alone was valued at millions of pounds. When customers paid their meal in cash, Marco only gave back uncirculated banknotes and coins in change. Every morning, Marco and his crew would roast 36 chickens, collect the juices, then throw the actual chicken in the trash. They would then take the extracted chicken juice and add it to their other chicken dishes to juice them up. If you do the math, it means that every chicken Marco served contained the juice of about 2.2 chickens. The point I'm getting to is that Marco was absolutely obsessed with making his restaurant the absolute best in Britain, if not the world. But could he do it?
For the next 3 years, we pushed and we pushed and we pushed and we did everything. In January 98, we won our 3 stars with 5 red knives and forks. I'd realized my dream all those years later.
4 months after moving into the Oak Room, Marco's restaurant had achieved 3 Michelin stars, 5 red knives and forks, and a score of 19 out of 20 in the prestigious Gaumeo. Gaumeo famously never gave out 20 out of 20 scores because perfection is impossible. Marco had now completely proven himself as one of the greatest chefs in the world, one of the greatest kitchen brigade leaders, and an indisputable master chef. So, now what? The problem with achieving your life goals at 38 is that your life still goes on, and that drive that propelled you to accomplish your dreams is no longer there, because your dreams are already accomplished. So Marco fell back on his instincts, continuing to work at his restaurant, trying to deliver on his reputation as one of the greatest chefs in Britain. But it wasn't the same.
Winning 3 stars is got to be without question the most exciting journey of any chef's life. Retaining them is the most boring job in the world. And I was 38 years old, and I'd leave home in the morning and my children are sleeping, and I'd go home at night time and my children are sleeping. My first option was to continue to be a prisoner of the world that I created, working 6 days a week and lots of hours not seeing my children. My second option was to live a lie like a lot of chefs do in this world and pretend they cook when they're not cooking, charging high prices. One day I'm salmon fishing, one Sunday I'm fishing on the test for salmon. And every time I caught a salmon, I rested the pool. I sat on the bench and I lit and this little thought came into my mind. Marco, you're being judged by people who have less knowledge than you. And that thought is what gave me the courage to make the meeting and tell Michelin that I was stepping down.
So, in a completely unprecedented move, Marco gave back his Michelin stars, gave back his red knives and forks, and quit the kitchen entirely. The next couple of years, Marco didn't really do much of anything. Without his restaurant to pour his heart and soul into anymore, he ended up retreating from public life and into the forest.
I became incredibly lost.
Yes.
And so I became incredibly lost. And I did exactly what I did when I was 6. Because at 6, my mother died. And I turned to Mother Nature. She was my surrogate mother. She looked after me.
He's 6, 7 years old. He's a very mature buck. He served his time. He's passed on his genes. And it's now time for him to be taken out.
There you go. Shot. That is a clean kill.
Do not push me. I don't think you understand what I am.
There you go, Marco. Well done, Marco. Well shot.
Yeah, Marco basically spent the next couple of years working on his KD ratio, and good for him. These excursions allowed Marco to take things slow and actually think his life over. And if you look at the interviews he gives after he retired, he is way more mellow and collected.
But when I walked back into London 5 years later, I discovered myself as a human being. I was comfortable within my skin. I actually knew who I was.
But his passion for the kitchen was long gone, and Marco had no interest in putting himself behind the stovetop again.
Do you cook at home still?
No, the wife does.
Until one day something would compel him to come out of retirement. Reality TV.
So then you moved into TV. What was that like? What was the thought behind that? Were you approached to do it? Did you seek it out?
TV is the most boring job on earth.
But this salvation came with its own set of problems, because Marco already had an established reputation with the British public, both for being one of the greatest chefs in British history and for being a complete bastard. So he needed some help to rebrand his public image into one that better suited the Marco of today.
Along with his faithful driver, Mr. Ishii, Marco is on a journey to find the best food in Britain.
Marco's Great British Feast is a mini-series from 2008. It involves Marco traveling around the UK on a quest to find Britain's most tolerable dishes, to eventually incorporate them into the ultimate British feast. Most of the show consists of Marco finding the best local ingredients that Britain has to offer. Sometimes that means accruing them himself.
Go on, here he is.
Other times, in the case of things like vegetables and farm animals, he finds the best man for the job.
Farmer John Kenny specialises in good old-fashioned British pigs.
Morning. I've heard a lot about your pigs.
Thank you very much. Who the fuck starts a conversation like that? Morning, Marco. I've heard a lot about your pigs. You're not even looking at them, dude. Now, this is technically a show about food. There's even some recipes here if you really have a hankering for making rabbit stock or whatever. But the food is never the star of the show.
That's a big pig. Look at that. They're amazing. I love these pigs. Does anyone ride them? Hello, boy. Hello. Come on. Come on, boy. Come on, girl. He lived a fantastic life. He was a happy pig. I saw him in the woods when I finally found him. Just...
This man fascinates me, not just for who he is, but also the role that he's playing in this show. Because on some level, Marco's Great British Feast is a rebrand for Marco. It's saying, yeah, Marco might have been a bit of a dirtbag back in the day, but there's more to this guy than just kicking out dinner guests and bullying Gordon Ramsay till he cried. You know, he has a human side too.
That little railway, look at that little pony there, donkey. I like donkeys. Mr. Ishii, can you reverse, please? I want to see the donkey. Do you like donkeys? Look at this donkey. Look at his tongue. Look at this donkey. It's fucking great. Look, can you hear him? Oh, can you hear him? He loves me. Hello, boy. He's a nice donkey. Do you want to ride him, Mr. Ishii? Hello, boy. Do you have donkeys in Japan?
Yes, we do have, yes.
Pigs and donkeys are my favourites.
But that vibe shatters just a few minutes later when he starts threatening the camera crew over frozen eel.
Oh, God. Frozen fucking smoked eel. Don't take me on this one, please. It's been frozen. I don't want to be filmed. Do you understand? Do not push me. I don't think you understand what I am. I control myself very well.
So this whole show feels less like I'm watching a lovable British oaf trying to make a nice meal, and more like I'm watching a retired Bond villain trying to reintegrate himself into society.
But it's too easy to bully your way through life. And I just think, you know, it is England, Britain on a plate. They can have their choice. But now we're moving into another world, and that world is the world of puddings. And this is where I will step in and make my decision.
I mean, the thing you gotta keep in mind with Marco is that he spent his whole youth chained to the stovetop. And while that has made him a god in the kitchen, it absolutely dumpstered his social development.
And the only world that I felt comfortable within was in the kitchen. Because it was the norm to me. It was the world that I grew up in. Outside of that kitchen, I was quite socially inept.
So whenever he steps outside a restaurant, he is visibly uncomfortable.
I very rarely step out of my own environment. It's the way I am.
This scene here where he goes to the supermarket is my favorite. Because it's like he doesn't know how to behave himself. He starts directing foot traffic and shit. He walks up to random people to give them lectures about mustard.
Look, see, this is great. Do you like this? Oh, I love mustard. It's the best mustard in the world. Supermarkets, you can't sort of poo-poo them. You've got to look at them for what they are. They're convenient. You can buy most things.
I know what a supermarket is, Marco.
See, if you smell your fruit, when you're buying fresh fruit, you should always smell it. If it doesn't smell of pineapple, it doesn't taste of pineapple. If it doesn't taste of oranges, if it doesn't smell of orange, it doesn't. So you have a quick smell. Can you smell orange?
Marco, you can't go up to random people at Waitrose and ask them to smell their oranges.
As Marco leaves the supermarket, he spots his favourite fish of all time.
Ah, so I see you whipped out the turbot since I was last here. That's very nice. What's great about it is it's affordable, isn't it? So when you think for £4.54 for the turbot, it's cheap. If that was a wild fish, it'd be another 2-3 quid on top.
Marco, stop fondling the turbot. But you know, as mad as the supermarket scene is, there is a point that Marco is trying to make here. He isn't cooking expensive French cuisine for the upper crust anymore. He's making great food that anyone can enjoy. And what better way to kickstart this change in cooking philosophy than by partnering with some of the industry's finest flavor enhancers?
Okay, we'll just. You want me to chop the chicken? I'll chop the chicken. You want me to chop the mushrooms? I'll chop the mushrooms. You want me to make the sauce? I'll make the sauce.
Okay,
But don't expect me to sell my heart. Never accept that.
The beauty of Knorr fish stockpot is not just the product, it's what it does for you, it's how it assists you at home. It's the best stock possible.
In the mid-2000s, Marco would make a series of cooking videos for Knorr, showcasing their line of stock products.
Lamb chops, very nice, very simple, fabulous for grilling. But how do you make them tasty? Well, firstly what I do is I make a paste with my Knorr lamb stock cubes.
These videos have been sitting on YouTube for 14 years in all their 240p glory, racking up millions of views a pop. And it's not because of the quality of the recipes, although they are pretty good. Obviously, the main draw to these videos is still Marco.
I came from the world of great French restaurants, where they controlled their environments by being subservient. You know, nothing was ever too much trouble. And you know, the show was in the room, not on the plate. All their energies went into the cooking, not the pictures.
I don't know what it is, man. I don't know if it's the complete lack of music, the student film style videography, or if it's just how hard this triple Michelin star chef is shilling for pre-packaged stock pots.
As I've said many times before, in the domestic kitchen, Knorr chicken stock pot, in my opinion, is a necessity. You can't make a stock at home as good as Knorr's chicken stock pot.
Dude, I'd love to see the house at this bottom. Marco is working for that sponsor money too. I've watched a lot of interviews of this man, and he plugs their products often and unprompted.
Michelin stars, they're my past. Today, enriching people's life. Whether it's opening a pub and selling very good food at a price point, or showing people the versatility of stock cubes. That's where I get my pleasure.
Like, usually when people do sponsored content like this, they put on the sponsor voice. You know what I'm talking about? You know, they talk normally for a bit and then something. But first, a message from Raid Shadow Legends. Marco doesn't do that. He always talks about Knorr stock pots like he's imbuing you with arcane knowledge.
Here's some steaks I selected from the supermarket. What I'm going to season it with is Knorr beef cube rather than salt and pepper. I think you get a better result.
What? No, fuck off. Marco, there's no way you season your steaks with Knorr beef cube. I'm not gonna lie though, there are some moments where his facade drops, and you can tell that he clearly does not care.
And I think that stockpot does a better job than just seasoning it with salt. But that's my preference. And I've used Knorr stock cubes for years.
I like how they cut away from his face so you don't see the pain in his eyes.
This is where a stock cube really helps you. Just adding a bit more cube just to...
Marco, blink twice if you're being held against your will. But you know, there's more to like about these videos than Marco's love for stock pots. Like the way he pronounces olive oil.
Generous amount of olive oil. Tiny little bit of oil. I'll finish off with olive oil. Little olive oil.
Just with a little dribble of olive oil.
Marco's usually such a well-spoken guy, but every time he mentions olive oil, it's like the foundations of language just collapse from beneath him.
If you don't like a lot of mayonnaise, don't put a lot in it. It's your choice. You want just olive oil and vinegar, like I had at home as a child.
Oh yeah, your choice. That's another thing he says a lot.
If you like a lot of balsamico, that's your choice. If you like a little bit, that's your choice. Use olive oil, your choice. Your choice. Your choice. And again, it's your choice. But it's your choice whether you put chili in. It's your choice how much horseradish you put in. It's your choice how much brown sauce you put in.
No, I didn't make Gordon Ramsay for I. that was his choice to cry.
Oh, speaking of Ramsay, actually, he had recently hosted the first season of Hell's Kitchen UK, and for its third season, they needed a new chef to take up the mantle. Now, if only there was someone who could take his place.
Big man, isn't he? With a big voice.
Yes, Marco! Yes, Marco! I want to knife somebody!
Yes, in the late 2000s, Marco was brought on as the head chef for Hell's Kitchen. And as far as reality TV goes, it's clearly a much better format for him. He is back in the kitchen, back in his home turf, where he's free to just be Marco again.
Where's my kingfish? Where's my kingfish? Where's the fish? Where's the fish? How long for my 17 kingfish? How long for my 17? How long? 4 minutes, Marco! I've got 2 fish! Fish!
Marco is not an easygoing guy in the kitchen, but thankfully he is a lot less tyrannical here than he was back in the Harvey's days. Part of that is him mellowing with age, another part is probably the 5.6 million witnesses, but also he just doesn't need to throw pans at people to make them fear him anymore. He just looks at them now.
Should I put it in some butter in the pan?
It's up to you.
The difference between Gordon Ramsay and Marco is like the difference between an explosion and an implosion. Gordon will tear you down through relentless outside force. Meanwhile, Marco just stares at you till you crumple of your own volition.
If you gave that to your mother, would she be happy?
Not with the way it is right now.
Marco would claim that his mission on Hell's Kitchen was to add reality back into reality TV.
But what I try to do is put as much reality into the show as possible. I try to give people an insight into the world that I came from.
That being said, it's still reality TV, and Hell's Kitchen is by no means immune to editorialization. The first episodes especially spend a lot of time playing into Marco's reputation, dedicating a big chunk of the first episode to Marco kicking out dinner guests.
I know your ex-wife. I know all about it.
Good girl. Nicholas, clear that table. Take everything off.
Sorry, sir. I do apologise. Unfortunately, we won't be serving you any more food this evening.
And then in the second episode, there's this weird C-plot that ends with Marco signing a picture of himself to Margaret Thatcher. Yes, that Margaret Thatcher.
Sign your own good-looking photo, please.
Stop seeking attention. Have a bit more grace like your dear mother.
I've got lots of grace, but it actually is for her. So if you could sign for Maggie,
then I'll do that. Then I will do that. She was a great woman.
Marco has gone on to do a bunch of iterations of both Hell's Kitchen and Masterchef, and even starred in a few cooking shows of his own, all of which tanked pretty much immediately. But who cares, you know? Because Marco is more than just a reality show host. He is also the little Christmas food ambassador.
Steak and onions. It doesn't get any better. And especially when it's Irish Angus.
And redefined meat.
It's like eating meat. It's extraordinary.
And Aga pots.
They are, without question, the best steak you can have in a domestic kitchen.
And Range Rover.
But I have to be brutally honest. I did drive into the future in a Range Rover.
Stilton is without question the king of all cheeses. And as you can guess, I'm in Melbourne, one of the great cities of the world. And that's why British raspberries are the best in the world.
And let's be honest, if it wasn't for cinnamon resorts, I would never have had this opportunity. And the British High Commission. And let's not forget Sri Lankan Airlines. They flew me here. That's good food.
A lot of people dog on Marco for banking literally every single check that he possibly can, but I can't say I really blame him. Marco's a grandfather now. He has kids to feed and mansions to maintain, and being a chef is a young man's game. It makes sense that he would want to transition into being more of a public figure. That's why he also spends a lot of his time doing speaking engagements like university seminars.
I'm not saying I touched every college student. I tried to. And if I did, then I succeeded.
Other than that, he's doing a lot of retired chef shit. You know, he's running his own restaurants, hotels, launching his own beer, and famously doing a round of masterclasses for the BBC Maestro program.
And then the peppers. We puncture them. And then we deep fry them until they start to blister. Then we place them in a bowl, cover with cling film, and allow them to cook in their own steam.
These videos are great, just pure ASMR.
And the dish I'm going to do next is just a little bit of fun. It's very simple. It's not 3 stars Michelin, but is it delicious? Is it naughty? Do you want to eat it? Yes.
This is a totally different man from the person who ran Harvey's with an iron fist 3 decades ago. He is calm, quiet, and contemplative. He doesn't make braised pig's feet anymore. He makes scrambled eggs while giving you life lessons.
Just be patient. Never rush things. Never push things. If we push things, then we tend to break them.
Though occasionally he likes to drop hints that, at one point, he was the greatest chef in the world.
Okay, take a little garlic. We could be professional and take the core out. But I'm a home cook now, not a professional cook.
How you doing, big boy?
I think my bait's dead.
Hey?
I think my bait's dead.
It's all right. Just don't leave it. Let it work. Let it work itself. You know what I'm saying?
I think I'm going too far out.
Gordon Ramsay and Marco have had a troubled relationship throughout their careers. After Gordon really hit it big with the British public, the feud between him and his former mentor became tabloid fodder for years. Initially, Gordon was quite harsh when discussing his time under Marco, calling him out as an abuser and manipulator, and deservedly so. But that was years ago, and with his time in Harvey's slipping further and further into history, Gordon's had a lot more time to think about what Harvey's meant for him, both as a chef and as a person. There's a really nice clip from last year that I think really sums up how to best approach an environment like Harvey's.
And I think it's a lot of life lessons early on because you're getting structured, you're getting hungry, you're getting knowledge, and all of a sudden you're becoming a beast because of the monster he created and the monster you're working for. And so I see those environments all the time, and I say to the individuals, stay in that environment, get what you need and get out. And when the shit hits the fan, learn to dance in the storm.
That's really the best way to approach that kind of chaotic, high-level environment. Get in there, learn what you can, and get out. Marco Pierre White is what happens when you let that environment consume you, when you let that drive to become the very best at something overshadow everything else in your life. Marco was determined to become the greatest chef in England, and in the end, he succeeded. But in that fury, he became blind to the pain that he caused to the people around him, and especially the pain that he caused to himself.
And the truth is, I'd worked hard for 22 years for something that I never wanted.
Only once he accomplishes his dream does he realize how vapid it all was, how little his sacrifices truly meant. And in order to get to a place of fulfillment in life, he needs to change. He needs to somehow unlearn the mindset that made him successful in the first place. And the years that followed showed him slowly trying to pull himself out of being the beast he created. And some of it was televised. And some of it's really funny. I'm probably reading way too much into this, but at the end of the day, that's just how I choose to interpret the story of Marco Pierre White. And as the guy himself would say, that's my choice. Good night.